right, then, before we just left the courtroom, the state had rested, taken up some preliminary motions, and Mr. Kirsch asked for the defense.
Defense rests, Your Honor.
All right, thank you very much.
3 words, the defense rests. Now, they don't have to prove anything, right? It's up to prosecutors to prove everything. You can make your case through cross-examination. And in many trials across this country, day in and day out, defendants don't present a case. Many times it's because the defendant is guilty and there is no case to present. But in murder trials, usually there's something that the defense brings forward, but not so in this case. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae, who's been covering this. Julia, somewhat surprising because, you know, it is a murder case. And in murder cases, there's so many different issues. There could be experts that could testify about things. But in this case, nothing from the defense.
Not one witness, and the defendant made the choice not to testify as well in this case. That's what we heard from the defense today while they were in court. What's surprising to me that they did not at least call an expert, someone who could refute some of the evidence that was brought out by the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab. Through cross-examination, the defense seemed to effectively poke holes in some of the way that this evidence was taken and some leads that were not looked at. But ultimately today, this defense deciding to not put on any evidence or testimony in front of the jury.
And again, we know, right, they don't have to prove anything. There's no burden on them, and it can't be used against them that they didn't bring forth any evidence. But sometimes there's a witness here, a witness there. Maybe you recall one of the investigators to get into an area that you couldn't get into on cross-examination. But it didn't happen here. So let's talk about the evidence that the jury will have. And let's begin with those last phone calls between James and his fiancée, Molly. Let's take a listen.
States Exhibit 169H, April 24th of 2018, phone calls, or I'm sorry, April 27th of 2018, phone calls. One from James to Molly at 8:26 p.m. lasting 47 seconds. And then one from Molly back to James, 8:30 for 22 minutes and 43 seconds. Does this reflect the DriveSense application of the map for the last trip on that phone?
Yes.
Is the date of the last trip April 27th?
Yes, ma'am.
Does the trip begin or end at 8:54?
That is the ending time of the trip.
Is the duration of the time 22 minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
So 22 minutes ahead of 8:54 would be what time?
8:32. Sorry, yes. 8:32 p.m.
All right, that's Patrick Sublette from the Cyber Crimes Unit. He's a supervisor there at Julie Janae. And this is the last phone call, right?
This is the last phone call that was made by Molly Watson before she died. This was the big reveal by the prosecution in their opening statements, that the exact amount of time that it took for her to leave her home and talk to James Addie all the way up until she ended that call was the time that she died, or the prosecution's case is that's the timeline. So this was major evidence, and for the state to lay it out like this for this jury to see. We already know that James Addie admitted to investigators that he did talk to Molly Watson on April 27th, the day she died, likely knowing that there would be phone records confirming that.
Right, and you talk about that timeline, and you get a mental picture, right, that they're on the phone talking to each other as they're driving towards each other. Then when they meet, the phone call ends, and prosecutors will argue that's when the murder takes place. Okay, let's talk about the tire tracks. Take a listen.
Explain to the jury what you've done here.
This is a chart that I had made after my comparisons, during my comparisons, and it just kind of lists out the numbers 1 through 11, and they correspond between the tire and the impression. So on the left side, you see the number, top left, you see number 1, and what's circled on the tire corresponds to the number 1 on the impression itself, and then it just went through 1 through 11.
So you have 11 areas of individual characteristics?
Yes.
Is that, in your training and experience, is that a lot?
It's sufficient enough for an identification.
And what conclusion did you draw, if any, about the tire and the cast?
My conclusion was that particular tire made that particular impression.
All right, it's not DNA, it's not a fingerprint, but I could see a jury loving that evidence, especially with that side-by-side comparison.
11 points that make this similar. I think that was a great visual for this jury to understand how these tire casts are made at the scene, and then they are taken to the lab and the examiner matches what was at the scene to the actual tire in this case. I do think, though, this was not the strongest witness on cross-examination because he had a difficult time explaining, after being questioned by the defense attorney, what those individual characteristics are and what made these two, the tire track at the scene and the tire of the defendant, similar. He said it basically is something he's looking at in the lab and he can understand it when he's analyzing it, but he can't then go tell it to his colleague in the break room. But that's something that this jury needs to hear when they are in the courtroom.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those pieces of evidence that the jury may just look at in the jury room and try to figure it out for themselves. And it's not an exact science like DNA. It's more like handwriting analysis, right? I think it's much more similar to that. And, you know, I've seen cases where defense attorneys have really picked apart those types of experts. So maybe that's another reason why there wasn't an expert for the defense. They felt they did enough damage on cross-examination. We shall see. All right. A T-shirt that was found at the scene of the crime, a big, big piece of evidence. Let's listen.
The way you returned to the crime scene, was it the same way you had left?
No.
Right. How did you return?
I returned by going down 15 and taking M over to 930.
So route M as in Mary.
Correct, sorry.
And at some point, did you observe something that caused you to stop your patrol vehicle?
Yes.
What was that?
It was a shirt, white shirt, laying in the middle of the road.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 59. Is that the shirt you found?
Minus all the circles, yeah.
Do you recognize that shirt?
Yes.
Right. How do you recognize that shirt?
There was a contest in my graphic design class that we had to go to, and we had to print certain designs on the t-shirt a certain way, and everybody in the class did theirs correctly. I'm the only one who messed up very bad, so
Okay.
I know that's my shirt.
All right, Julie, Janae, and I noticed this as I was going through some of the social media sites that talk about the trials on Court TV, and people are like, well, what's this about the T-shirt? Why is this important? So maybe you can answer that for him right now.
Well, this T-shirt is something that is found at the crime scene. So that is why it came into this case. And when the investigators looked closer at this shirt, they were able to, in the crime lab, find that there is DNA on it and there's gunshot residue. The DNA on it matches the victim, so that ties it very closely to Molly Watson's death. And then you just heard James Addie's daughter on the stand saying that this T-shirt was hers, and it's easily identifiable because it was made wrong. The alignment is off, and she knew that everyone else in the class did theirs correct. Hers was unique because she did it incorrectly. And later in her testimony, she said she gave those extra problematic shirts, or at least one of them, to her father, who said he was going to use it for a rag, perhaps in his garage with his car. What we don't know about this shirt is how it got on the scene, who placed it, where they placed it, but the prosecution, of course, bringing it in because it links the victim to the defendant and this item that we know originated out of his household.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's an amazing piece of evidence because of the DNA, the gunshot residue, and then it's so distinct. And it was his own daughter who had to get on the witness stand and just speak the truth. I mean, devastating moment, I think, for the defense. All right, let's talk about text messages. Here's the prosecutor reading some of the text messages between the defendant and the victim.
Also talked about my worries and just keeping things calm. He asked a question that I kind of wondered about, though. He asked if it was possible that the funeral had already happened and the kids didn't know that you didn't know. James' response, 11:49, the funeral is tomorrow. Another text at 11:53, I love you. Molly to James at 11:55, I'm sorry, sweetness. I love you so, so much. Is that why you're getting sick earlier? Response from James the same minute, no. Molly at 11:56, are you okay? James the same minute, no. Molly at 11:57, talk to me, please. James at 11:59, my nerves are shot. I'm getting ready to head to the airport in St. Louis to pick people up for the funeral.
All right, I think this is devastating on two levels. One, obviously, James is just lying through his teeth about this funeral because we saw his ex-wife come into court and testify. She's alive. And then the other part is seeing or hearing from the victim, from Molly Watson. Seems like a real, I mean, she's in love. She's calling him sweetheart. She couldn't be nicer.
She's trying to rationalize all of this. You can hear that in those text messages. She's knowing that he told her that his ex-wife has died after being hospitalized for a long period of time in a car accident. And now she's finding out, we know from other testimony, that she searched whether or not there was an obituary online for Melanie Addie and didn't find one, obviously. So now she's questioning him and she's saying things like maybe there was a funeral beforehand and the kids didn't know. He's not giving her a lot of answers. James Addie is not. And she's asking, is that why you're sick earlier? Likely he made up that lie, saying that he was sick. That's why he couldn't talk. That's why he couldn't be with her. And she's just begging him for more information as they get closer and closer to their wedding date, which is only a few days out.
That poor woman. I mean, you know, as it's unraveling, and let's play a little piece of, again, we'll go back to Patrick Sublett from the Cyber Crimes Unit, testifying about the searches that Molly was doing. Unbelievable. Take a listen.
These are the searches we were discussing earlier.
Yes, ma'am.
Do they take place on April 26th of 2018?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the general theme of these searches?
Searching for obituary or death notices for Melanie Shepherd, Melanie Addie. Deaths, obituaries in the Paris or Mexico, Colombia area. So made me think somebody was looking for a death notification or notice.
I mean, I feel so bad for this woman and what she went through, and then, of course, how she died. It was just awful. But she's basically, I think, at this point, sort of catching on a little bit.
It seems so, and I'm looking at that information that she has in these searches that she's doing. She has the maiden name, Melanie Shepherd, of the ex-wife of her then fiance. She has where she lived in Mexico, Missouri. So I'm wondering if she knew those things because James Addie was that free with the personal information of his family that he was actually trying to keep away from her, or if she was doing her own digging in other ways and learned that information in order to make those searches.
Unbelievable development. So what do we have coming up tomorrow?
Tomorrow we'll have those closing arguments from both the state and defense. They're expected to go about 30 to 45 minutes. Then after this jury gets those instructions from the court, the 3 alternates out of that jury panel are going to be excused, and the 12 will go into deliberations, and they'll be able to deliberate as long as they want. They'll let the judge know when they either want to go home or whether or not they have come back with a verdict or decision.
The bottom line, you need to be watching your television all day long tomorrow because this trial has moved awfully fast, and sometimes when these trials go this fast, deliberations go even faster. So, Julia Janae, Court TV legal correspondent, thank you so much.